Welcome to Business Mastery with Dawn Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. We're going to be talking about AI in your business, but we're going to be talking about embracing it in a way that doesn't feel threatening to maybe how you're doing things today. I know that there's some resistance about AI and everything you read in the news is bad. So we're going to actually change that conversation and change that perspective a bit so that we can leverage it in a way that's helpful and supportive, and we don't have this same amount of fear, I think is the best word, around what we should be using it for and what we can be using it for and looking to the future. So I have Jenna on here. She can tell us all about it. We're going to work through all kinds of things with it today. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
Absolutely. So my name is Jenna Nelson, and I'm the founder of HerAIgency, and I primarily work with female founders and women-led businesses to strategically implement AI, in ways exactly like you talked about, that doesn't feel threatening, that doesn't feel scary, and it doesn't disconnect you from actually owning your own brand. We're not trying to let AI take over your brand. We're trying to strategically implement it in ways that actually make sense.
Right. So some of the most common ways AI could be implemented by somebody who even doesn't have a lot of experience with it, what would you say? So I've seen some stuff about, marketing. What else should we be considering it for?
Certainly. Marketing is a great kind of first entry point. I think we all feel like we could be doing more marketing or better marketing, or, we're behind on posting on social media, getting emails out. So that's always something that I think can just help, catch us up. But also look at it, in terms of your operations as well. How can we better improve our client experience by incorporating AI? Can we get back to them faster? Can we move forward in a process faster because we don't have to go through, maybe a long, initial intake call, and instead have that employee doing something maybe more productive and more helpful to the client? So certainly, there's some operational use cases, and then certainly data analytics reporting. That is something, that before you may have needed a CFO to really help you understand your cash flow and where stuff is going and what you're spending the most on. And now you can kind of get to those answers and that level of data analytics with AI, and, not have to have a full C-suite to do it, which I think is a big benefit, particularly for smaller businesses that are, running lean.
Right. Yeah, and the fractional CFO and the fractional COO and stuff, that world probably could be even more supported with that additional data collection and processing, maybe reduction. And then of course humans still have to make those decisions, right? And weigh those costs and risks. So
Absolutely.
let's get into just some of the things that we're seeing that might give people pause. Let's start with
Sure.
marketing. I have seen so many posts that say, "Oh, that was definitely written by AI. It's AI everywhere. It's always AI." So in, the non-AI, non-digital world, I know that that was probably a thing with copywriters for years. It was like, do they have my brand voice? Do they understand what I'm trying to do? And so we have humans that became copywriters and worked with clients to get all that down. So, let's talk about AI and copywriting and marketing and brand presence and voice and the fears around, oh no, it's going to sound, look, feel, taste, touch like AI if I use it.
Yeah. So, one thing I talk a lot about is sort of the two-sided responsibility model. AI does not think for you, and it does what it does based on the input you give it and the framework that you give it and the parameters that you give it. So, you have just as much responsibility as the AI does to give it the context and the clarity that it needs to get the output that you actually want, slop in, slop out, right? And that's a lot of what you're talking about with, what we see online is, yeah, absolutely. I can tell when somebody has gone into a free version of Chat GPT and said, make me a social media post about blank. And that's all the context they've given it. They've never trained this AI tool. It doesn't know anything about their business. So yes, it's going to look sloppy. It's going to feel very generic. It's not going to feel like their brand, but that's because they haven't given it enough to work with. And that's no different than hiring a new assistant, right? And if you hired a brand new executive assistant and gave them exactly those instructions and nothing else, we wouldn't expect to get great results either. And AI is no different there. So, one of the things that I focus on with my clients is our very first step is aligning. And I've got like a 3-step framework: align, automate, appear, that I take my clients through, and that alignment step cannot be skipped. I start everyone there because I can't train an AI tool to understand your business if you don't understand your business yet. If you can't verbalize, I find that all the time, right? Like, so much of our business lives in our head as founders. And maybe we haven't written it down. Maybe we haven't really thought about, well, who is my ideal client? What are their pain points? So I find when I go through this process with business owners, there's just a lot of brand strategy gaps that they haven't filled yet from a human perspective. And so it does 2 things. One, I think it helps align their brand strategy, internally, because they get a chance to just sit and focus on those questions and those answers and make sure that we've got a clean brand strategy. But then I can take it and train the AI tools to understand exactly what that brand is, who that founder is, who they serve, why they do it. The first step to anybody using AI is you have to train it, and then you have to give it context and parameters. And something I always like to tell people too is, I feel like a lot of it is, okay, do this. We're prompting, we're saying, hey, I want you to do this. And I want people to shift their thinking on that a little bit and think more about the outcome that you want and work backwards. And if you give AI that, this is what I need, this is where we need to land, here's the background, here's the context, here's my brand brief, it's going to get you there, without you having to do the work to figure out how to instruct it. So you can really get away from like the really detailed engineered prompts in that manner. So that's really where I start people is we've got to train it. We've got to understand your brand. And once you do that, you're going to really elevate what your AI tools are giving back to you.
So when you say train your AI, let's figure out what that means to train your AI, right? Because a lot of people use it, I'm gonna say more like Google,
Mhm. Yeah,
uh, and they'll put prompts in and maybe they'll put parameters around it, like
sure.
location parameters or price points or something, especially in market research.
Mhm.
But, training an AI to support you, what does that look like? Because what I'm hearing is you have to have the clarity first, but you
Yes.
can also train the AI to look for gaps. You can
Yeah.
actually ask it a question and say, what am I missing?
Yeah.
What have I not considered? So, how do we train an AI? What does that even mean?
Yeah. So, it's a little different depending on which tool and platform you're using. But the base thing is like you need to create a very robust knowledge base. For me, that's a full brand brief for all of my clients. That's everything from tone, offers, client pain points, things like that. You wanna give it if you've got good writing, if you've written a blog you're really proud of, if you've written, a book, if you've, got any kind of materials like that, even transcripts, and I take every transcript of every podcast I've done, every webinar I've done, and I feed it back to my AI tools because it learns from the repetition of what I say and how I say it. That reinforcement learning is really important. So, take all of the things that you've got that make your brand or your business feel like you, great pieces of content, things like that, and give it to the AI to learn and say, "Hey, read through this, ask me questions, ask follow-up questions. What's unclear? Um doesn't feel, well documented? What processes do you still have questions about? So ask it, like you said, use it to kind of bounce back feedback and say, okay, what am I still missing? What do you not have? And by then, you've got a really great knowledge base already kind of baked in. And so, on Chat GPT, that might look like custom instructions. That might look like a custom GPT. I still really love custom GPTs because they are so focused on exactly what you train it for, which I think can be really, really valuable for certain business aspects. But you could go into Claude and create a project too, right? So you could do this in Claude projects. You could do this in Gemini. Gemini certainly, has all of the access to your Google Drive, your Gmail. It has far more information than some of the others do. So you can get really well trained tools without a lot of effort. And the more you use it, the better it gets. And that's kind of something I caution people about too, is don't try to use every tool that's out there. Pick one and get really, really good at that one and get that one really well trained on you, your brand, your offers. And then, there are certain things that each platform does better than others. And certainly you could take something and say, Claude tends to be a bit more of a narrative writer. So maybe you take something over and you let Claude put some polish on it. But if you're always using a different tool, you're going to get really disconnected because it's not learning and it's not noticing what you're changing. So my other, tip too about training is if you take something out and you edit it, you paste it into an email and then you make a ton of effort edits, copy that back in and give it back to your tool and say, this is what I changed and why. Because otherwise, it's going to assume it did it perfect. It gave you exactly what you want. We move on. So that reinforcement learning, that kind of coaching it on what you would do differently. If it tells you something wrong, tell it, because that's going to get you, up to speed faster.
I do want to point out, I believe the training and the agents, you have to have a paid version. But even at the $20 or 15, whatever it's at right now, it's not a huge investment, I think, to have the AI do this. But the free versions, I don't think they have a memory.
It has very limited memory. You certainly can't, create custom GPTs with the free version. You can use them, but if somebody else has given it to you. But yes, the paid versions, they're there for a reason, and you don't need all 10 of them. You don't need to pay for all of them. And you don't need, I personally use the $20 version of ChatGPT. I don't need the $200 version. And I work in this all day, every day. So it is a pretty minimal investment. And I guarantee you can get that $20 worth of benefit out of it in an hour a week, if that. So it's absolutely worth it.
Amazing. All right. So let's move off of marketing. Let's get into market research, data analytics, because that is a place where just honestly, small business and small business owners don't necessarily do a lot of the market research frequently simply because it used to be such a manual task, right? So
Mhm.
you had to go and you had to look at your competitors. There were a million places to search to find the industry information. There may have been something going on in an adjacent industry, but you had to know to have to go and look there. So, how do you see AI supporting even market research? We've been using it now for about a year to help us sort of guide, I don't know, all kinds of decisions. But again, it's a trust but verify. But how do you like the AI and the sites and the sourcing and the things for market research? And how does your client base use it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think there's a couple of ways. The first is just the data organization, right? Like you can take 20 spreadsheets and dump them all into AI and ask it to summarize and categorize and find, those kind of bits and pieces that we used to have to literally like sit and copy and paste Excel formulas or, try to combine everything and figure out what was happening. So you can get that analysis point so much quicker than you ever used to be able to, right? And so this is no longer spending hours poring over spreadsheets. This is you can have it done in 10 minutes to know, okay, this click-through rate is really high or, whatever it is. So just the data organization, I think is so powerful, and just something that we haven't been able to easily do before. The other thing too is the actual, like, you mentioned competitors, the deep research ability. So, we're not going to Google and just typing in our competitors and trying to see what's out there, right? Like you can, go into, I like Chat GPT's deep research because it cites better personally, than Claude does. But you go in and you say, here are my competitors. I want to do some research on whatever it is that you're trying to come up with, and let it do it for you. Let it save you that 4 hours of manual research. And what's great too is it may find stuff that you hadn't thought of. Maybe there's a competitor you're not even aware of, somebody that's kind of coming up that, is on your tail and you don't know yet. So it can do a great job with that. And then, I think the third, and this is, moving into a more advanced, use case of it, but with, agentic AI, you can get these, agents to run this market research for you weekly, daily, every 6 hours, if that's what you need. And you don't have to touch it, right? Like you set that up once, you get it to pull that for you, it formats a report and it sends you a report every Monday morning of here's all the data on, your competitors for the past week. So, depending on how much data you need, how frequently you need it, agents can be a really great way to just save yourself a ton of time. And I think find things that you might not have found otherwise, which is a huge benefit as well.
Yeah, and I do wanna point out because this is something I'm incredibly fascinated with, is that business intelligence, in that
Yeah,
small to medium-sized businesses don't have floors of analysts. They don't
right.
have people who are out there collecting consumer research and those things, but
Absolutely.
AI can actually go in and be like, "Oh, we'll take the report from Statista or whoever else, and we can distill it down to the relevant data for smaller businesses."
Absolutely.
That's what I really like about it, but I know there's gonna be people listening in right now, I'm gonna ask the question, if I put my stuff from my business up into AI, does that mean it is training the model and now my competitors also see my stuff? And if I use AI, can I trust it to keep my, trade secrets? We know that there's been some stuff on the legal side where if you go in and you put things in, it doesn't have attorney client privilege. So that's been working its way through the courts. But what about trade secrets? What about what my great ideas are, right? So I do wanna address that because I know someone's driving around right now or running or biking and going, "Yeah, wait a minute. Can we trust this to be private?"
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer is you absolutely do need to be careful. You shouldn't blindly hand it all of your information. And the answer is really platform specific. OpenClaw is really scary. If you don't know what OpenClaw does, please don't put it on your machine.
Right.
That can be a really, really scary one. On the other hand, using ChatGPT and turning off web search and putting, those privacy filters in place, pretty safe, right? You can, keep you there are options, there are settings to allow or not allow your data to be used to train models. So you can turn those on and off. So that's, potentially, a way to work around it. But I would say, and it's obviously it depends on the business and what their, trade secrets are and how secretive those are. Um, but you want to treat it like your loosest lipped employee, frankly. If you wouldn't tell somebody in your organization that you didn't trust, then probably don't broadly put it into AI. Now, again, there are ways and toggles and things like that that you can work around. But you do need to be careful because yes, absolutely, the majority of it is retraining itself with the information we give it. And to some degree, we want that, but for trade secrets, for private financial information, like please don't go put your social security number into public chat GPT. or clan, but
Or your customer list or your customer payment.
or your customer list.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, any of that kind of stuff. Credit card numbers, like don't give it that. But I think, I think the fear is reasonable, but for the most part, it can be worked around. You just need to do your research, know what tool you're using, what the proper protocols are in there. And that counts too for not only what information you're giving it, but then also for if you're producing a tool that you're putting out there to let your clients use, you need to protect that IP as well. So, one of the things I do with, my clients is we have very strict frameworks and guardrails built in where if somebody tries to ask it like how it's trained, how do you do this? It won't do it, right? It's going to shut down on them and be like, I'm sorry, I can't answer that. So that's an important thing too, is if you're producing something that is your IP, make sure that you can't go in there and just reverse engineer it and get that information right back. We don't want that either. So yeah, the security thing is important. I am not the top level expert on AI security, but I know just enough to be dangerous, probably. But certainly, my biggest tip is to be very very careful with the agentic ones. In particular, OpenClaw is still it can be a little scary for your average user right now.
right. Okay. So training the AI is going to take a little time, making sure that you've got the guardrails kind of set as you're using it. But let's talk about something comes out of AI. We're still responsible to review it, to make
Yeah.
edits, to make corrections. So I want to talk about that as well, because let's say you do train this agent and now it does sound like you like a human copywriter. It is able to source things for you, as far as, graphic ideas and things like that, just on the marketing side. And, you still have to check and make sure that those aren't copyrighted pictures. You need to make sure that the edits and things need to be done. With the advancements that you have seen over, I don't know, like the last 6 months or so, though, what are your thoughts and feelings on the additional human work that would come out of training an AI? Because now it's like, let's train the AI, then I have to go back and do it myself anyway. It kinda defeats our conversation. So let's also talk about kinda what we would need to maybe just consider, because as we're getting to that automated piece, right? Because I'm assuming some of that automation is scheduling posts or scheduling articles or being able to take and put things out into the world for your clients. You still have to review them. What is the protocol for things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am an absolute supporter of there should be a human in the loop at every phase of anything that's AI generated, AI published. Yes, I want to use it to expedite the process, to make it more efficient, to maybe even get a better result. But a human still needs to lay eyes on it, and a human needs to make judgment calls. Now, what's funny about that is that we have seen as recently as this week, people create AI images and personally post them, but the judgment call was maybe a little off. So there's always going to be that element of, should you post that? Is that appropriate? We've seen AI used to create images of, celebrities that they haven't endorsed that aren't acceptable. Um, so there's a human failure point there too, as well as the AI failure point. So just because a human is reviewing it doesn't mean that it's still not doesn't make it right. But certainly, I want somebody, eyeballing every piece of content that goes out. If it's legally sensitive, if it's medically sensitive, financially sensitive, that needs obviously a higher touch point to, ensure that you're not directing someone, down the wrong legal path or something like that. And then I think, put your disclaimers in there. We see it, on Meta all the time. Like, this was generated by AI. There might be mistakes. So put some of those disclaimers in there, and you can soften it in the way of, this was produced in conjunction with AI, but reviewed by a human. But there may be, put those guardrails in place for yourself just in case. Um, but yes, certainly checking imagery to make sure that it's not copyrighted, making sure that it's not I haven't really seen any strong examples of AI specifically plagiarizing anything. I'm not thinking that's really a big issue. It hallucinates, but it's not really just taking stuff and regurgitating it. So that one's probably not a big concern, but imagery for sure has been a hot topic.
Yeah, I recently, was watching a YouTube video. It was a business case study 'cause I'm kind of a nerd, but it literally said in the opening frames, it said, "Written, published, edited, or written, filmed, edited completely by humans." And I thought, "Oh, that's interesting. Are we almost to that point where there's that much of a trust issue?" Because as we are encouraging more people to use it for the efficiency and we are encouraging people to train them, do you think that there's a lot of hesitation where those disclaimers are going to make you more or less trustworthy in the marketplace?
I think so, my feeling on it is it doesn't have to be that way, but where that fear is coming from and where we're seeing that is exactly, where we started this conversation was with, the AI slop and the things that just aren't valuable out there. And unfortunately, the more of that that's out there and the more people see bad AI stuff, the more we fear it, right? And the less trustworthy it's going, to come off. So this is kind of my point where I'm like, this is our opportunity to make sure that we're using AI in a good way so that we can overcome that. My feeling on it is if the piece of content that you're putting out there is valuable, it's entertaining, it's educational, it helps someone in some way, then I don't personally care if AI was used partially or entirely, right? Like if it meets the goal. And Google tells us that, as well in terms of, how content is ranked. There is not a complete AI filter. I know a lot of people think that it scrapes off anything that's AI written. That's not true. If it is still within, they call it EEAT. If it is still useful content, then you can use AI. It's just about it being good content. So how you come about that is not as important as the actual product itself. So I would encourage people to use use AI fear cautiously. Certainly don't believe everything you see. Don't trust everything that's out there. That's always really been the case online. But don't assume that because something is AI that it's not valuable. I think it's is the big takeaway there. And if you saw a YouTube video where it said this has been written and produced by AI, don't immediately go, I'm not watching it. Um, Check it out first and see. And if it is bad AI slop, then tell them that, and maybe hopefully they'll stop.
Right, yeah. So I think that, the backlash and things that we're seeing is with the AI stuff that doesn't have human in loop just feels ingenuous. Like,
It
you
does.
didn't put the effort in, you didn't put the time in, you
Right.
didn't even so using AI to, let's say, generate 5 topics,
Mhm.
based on the market research, right? So, like, what if we used to do this with Answer the Public. If you remember, there's that website where you could go in there and you could research what the top Google searches were
Mhm.
so that you could see the questions that your audience was asking and you could write posts or you can do education or you do videos based on what the top Google searches were on the topic. So I'm not sure that it's a realistic fear that if you say generate 5 topics based on whatever, that that would be considered maybe AI doing anything. But I think there has been, at least recently, some pushback about the intention behind the use of AI. So I do want to talk about that as well, because I do believe that as business owners, we need to be able to sit on straddle the customer experience and our need for efficiency and our need to be able to meet what the complex market requires, which is no longer a couple of posts, a couple of LinkedIn's, a couple of whatever. You people need to see you 30 times now before they don't
Absolutely.
make a decision to follow you. I think that's the latest research. It's 30 times they have to see you.
And it used to be 7, and that
Oh,
used literally
yeah, right.
that was, like, 10 years ago that it was 7, and then it became 12, and now it's 30. Yeah, it's the amount of content that it takes to be visible is insane. And because there's so much out there, right? Everybody has an ability to have a YouTube channel now, good or bad. And so you have to be very visible. And that sometimes, that's kind of where AI steps in to help us do that.
Yeah, I mean, what it used to be, like you said, 10 years ago to get out into the marketplace versus now to stay, top of mind or whatever. I I if you think about AI kind of stepping in and getting it to the place where you can meet that market minimum of 30 without spending another 6, 8 hours, especially people like myself who are not graphic designers, who admit fully that I am not somebody who can create anything pretty as far as, what social media would accept.
Sure.
Um, you know, I think that I just wanna put that out there that the intent behind this and the use of it doesn't mean you care any less, but if you don't embrace this and you don't get to that 30 or whatever, you're actually likely gonna be less competitive, at least for visibility, even if you
Absolutely.
have the greatest product or service. I think it's becoming easier and easier to become the world's best secret, which I don't know how to feel about that, and I don't know how other people feel about it, but I think that's just a market reality, and I think this is the place to kinda bring that up because this is a tool to help you not become the world's best secret because everybody else is just running and producing more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And there is a necessary balance there between, you do need more content, but it also needs to be good content and it needs to be valuable. But that's, again, where I go back to use AI for the things like you said, you're not a graphic designer, that's not your skill set. But if you're really good at writing the content, if you have something valuable to say, and you're using AI to create the graphic to get it on Instagram with your, caption that is helpful, I don't see a problem with that. I think that that is great if it helps your audience. So I always encourage people to use it for the pieces that you're not good at. Use it for the things you hate doing or the bottlenecks in the process, right? Like if it's graphics, let AI do that now. It's very capable. We've come a long way in the last year on that. It's actually spelling things right now, and people don't have 18 fingers, and we've come a long way there. So use your brain to do the big work, the things that are really valuable, instead of burning yourself out for 8 hours trying to create a social media graphic that ultimately, if you're anything like me, you'll spend 3 hours on it and then be like, and I still hate this. So, that's not a valuable use of your time and it's not benefiting your client either.
Right, and I love how you keep saying if it's valuable and useful for the client. So, the training of the AI is probably really, if we're honest, less about the business owner converting in sales and much more about going out in the marketplace and just being very consistent. We would have had a human copywriter and, a video producer and all these things a few years ago. So, where else do you see AI maybe needing consideration, if not full embracing, for businesses over the next 18 to 24 months?
Certainly. So, I think one of them is your lead intake. People, it is, it's speed to lead, right? You can lose a lead in 2 minutes because you don't answer the phone and your competitor does, or because they didn't get, a text back right away or something of that nature. So, ultimately, somebody's calling your business for help. And if you aren't able to answer every single phone call or get them a text back or an email with some initial information, that shouldn't necessarily lose the sale. That doesn't mean that you're not good at what you do. I see this a lot. I work with a lot of small attorney firms, and they just don't have the manpower, right? The attorneys are in court. The paralegals are doing important, back end stuff. And maybe they have, a receptionist or an admin, but the volume is just like she can't answer every single phone call. So I've helped several of these, smaller law firms put, voice AI agents in place that, collect the lead information, text them their intake link and say, this is our first step with our firm. Please fill out this form. And then somebody will get back to you in 24 to 48 hours and let you know if this is a case we can support. And that stops them from missing the call and them picking up the phone to call the next attorney, right? That client feels like they've been heard, they've been helped, they have the initial step that they need to take to move forward. And I think that's a great use case, right? Instead of, hiring somebody to sit there and man the phones all day long, um, let do it. Voice AI handle that. I think that's or a chat widget on your website. We use it, the same way. So that has been an excellent use case. I also think lead filtering is another great use case for AI. I personally have gotten on a ton of consult calls in my, lifetime that they weren't the right fit for what I do. And that was a waste of my time. But more importantly, it was a waste of their time too, right? And it's awkward to get on those client consult calls and be like, yeah, you don't actually have enough of a budget for what, and that's awkward. So I love using initial lead intake filtering because it pre-qualifies them. And if they're not the right fit, it politely excuses them or directs them, to a different resource. We find that a lot with the law firms too, right? I can't tell you the amount of phone calls that a employment law firm will get for things like bankruptcy, which is not something that they handle. And then they leave a message and then they get mad that they don't call them back. And it's like, well, you weren't even calling the right type of firm. So now we can say, hey, we don't handle those types of cases, but we recommend so and so or something like that to help them faster. Um, so the lead intake filtering, right? It can kind of walk them through. I run a lot of digital ads and I, can put people through like my 5 consultative questions that tell me whether you're ready for ads or not. If you're coming to me without a proven offer, if you don't have a funnel yet, if you think you're going to spend $2 a day on ads, whatever that is, I can save you and me the time and, educate you in the right direction. And I like to make them consultative and say, it's not just like, yes, no, yes. It's not a quiz anymore, right? Like it's not just check the boxes. Okay, here's your score. It's thank you for sharing that. A really good starting point for Google Ads is at least $50 a day, whatever that might be. So, that I think is another really good use case because it gives your client the immediate brand experience that you want instead of leaving a voicemail, instead of waiting for a call back. You get that touch point immediately and you get to helping them faster, which I think is what we all want at the end of the day.
Yeah, the convenience and the speed and the lack of friction that we expect now in every I actually wrote an article on this on Substack a few days ago, from, this recording. But yeah, it's the post-pandemic world of I can order, it's here in 2 days, or I shouldn't have to talk to a human to place a reorder, or
Right, absolutely.
yeah, there's a huge expectation. I don't know that the use cases you just articulated would have been accepted the same way 5 years ago or 6 years ago.
Probably not. No,
Yeah,
probably
I think
not. And it
people still wanted to talk to a person on the phone about their legal matter, 6 years ago, and today they're more comfortable filling out a lead form without talking to a human.
Yep.
So, I think for small and medium-sized business owners as well, we have to look at the change in consumer expectation that they're not gonna give you all the information, but they're or maybe, it's like, "Oh, they got back to me. I'm willing to give them a little information, see if this is right before we take the next step."
Yeah.
And I definitely can see this, not just AI usage and things, but just meeting that client expectation probably actually leads to more brand loyalty just from the very first interaction.
I think it does, and I think it leads to higher conversion rates as well because you're also pre-qualifying them, that by the time they do get to a human, they're a warm buyer already. You've kind of already taken them through some of the preliminary stuff. They feel supported or helped, whatever they need, and it's gonna be easier to make that sale when you actually get them on the phone or get them into your office, which I think is really valuable as well.
I don't think I've talked to anybody else in the AI integration space that talks about how AI can warm a lead for you, but I think this conversation right here has convinced me that it's like, yeah. We've seen all the bad news stuff about the do loops on chat bots trying to get customer service, but lead intake and customer service are two completely different areas in the customer journey. So, I think I'm convinced that AI could warm a lead, uh, from using it correctly and in the brand voice and things. So, fantastic. I this conversation has been really incredible. How can everyone find you and maybe follow you, lurk you on social, or do business with you? Where can they
Yeah. Certainly. So I do a lot on YouTube. I do a lot of really just like short, impactful AI trainings. These aren't like 2-hour workshops. These are like 15 minutes things that you can like do today. So definitely check me out on YouTube. It's at HerAIgency on YouTube. So check me out there. That's probably the most education I can possibly give you. I'm certainly on LinkedIn and all of that as well. And then I also on my website. So piggyback off of what we were just talking about, I have a growth strategist on my website that will literally kind of walk you through where you are and where you might need to go next, which I think is a really valuable tool, even if you don't work with me, just to know like what would be the next lever I should pull. So certainly give that a try too. And if you are thinking about implementing like a lead intake system, it's a good kind of demo process to see how it might work. Obviously, it would be customized to your business, but see how it works. Because I get a lot of really great feedback on that. That's like, oh, I don't feel like I'm just getting on a call and not knowing what we're talking about. Now they're getting on a call with me and they're like, oh, I know I need this, and we're off to the races. We can go, and I don't have to give them, a 30-minute spiel. So I think it's been really effective.
Amazing. All right. So we're going to put all that down inside the show notes. So you're going to get the YouTube link. We're going to put the website. And if you find us on the day this launches or 2 years from now, everything will be there. And I appreciate your time and expertise. And thank you so much for really walking us through where AI should be embraced in your business. And a lot of this conversation I think is really counter to what the media says about AI in business. So I think it's important to have a different perspective, but more often than not, the media is looking for those clicks too. So they want to tell kind of the worst case scenarios.
Sure.
And here we really just kind of want to get to some other ways to think about things. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to y'all next time on the next episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to DawnKKennedy.com, and you can now check us out on YouTube as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.